Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Paul Cooper, the Chairman of Strategic Planning and Infrastructure, and I am delighted to welcome you to this evening's adjourned meeting of this committee. Just for everyone's information, this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anyone else be recording proceedings? The reason I ask is not to prevent you, just so that we're all aware. Councillor Grigg?
I reserve my right, please.
Thank you very much. That's noted. Nobody else? Thank you. For those members who are in the chamber, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please make sure you switch your microphones off when you have finished speaking, so that obviously any muttering you might have between you is not picked up on the YouTube channel, and so that it doesn't affect the quality of the audio. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, members, but obviously if the fire alarm does sound, please look to Olivia for further guidance. Just before we start, I'd like to apologise first and foremost. It was my decision to conduct this meeting on a Friday evening. If I explain the rationale very quickly, we had 10 days from the original meeting date to convene the adjourned meeting, which left only a choice of two. Tonight was the only evening which did not coincide with anything else, such as a briefing. So I do apologise. On that basis, I will do my very best to get through business as quickly as we possibly can. Nevertheless, I will allow all members an opportunity to speak and have their input. So moving on, apologies this evening. Item number 1, I have received apologies from Councillor Garton and Councillor Munford. And I can see everybody else is here. Item 2 is substitutes. Councillor Brindle is present for Councillor Garton. Thank you very much. Notification of visiting members. Councillor Harper has registered to speak on all items and is present on the webcast. And I can see that Councillor English is here. Councillor English, was there any particular item you wish to speak on?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. You will be unsurprised to note I wish to speak on the town centre strategy.
Thank you very much. I look forward to your input on that basis. I think that is everyone. There is no one else on the webcast or present. So item 4 is disclosure by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, members and officers? Nobody has indicated, therefore I'll take that as a no. Item number 5, disclosures of lobbying. At the previous meeting, I think everyone disclosed that they had been lobbied on the items relating to the local plan review. With exception of that item, has any member here been lobbied on any other item? Councillor Rose.
I apologise if this doesn't actually mean lobbying, but I have spoken to residents about the town centre strategy and hope to be able to relay to the committee words that were spoken to me for the strategy. So if that's lobbying, then I've been lobbied. If not, I haven't been. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's probably one of those which is just on the borderline between lobbying or non-lobbying, so thank you for disclosing that. And can I just double check, Councillor Brindle, I'm going to make the assumption that you have been lobbied also, as I think pretty much every councillor in this authority has, on items relating to the local plan review. Yeah, thank you very much. Just wanted to note that. So thank you. I think that, unless anyone else has any other items mentioned? No. Item number 6 is to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I don't believe there are any yellow pages this evening, and I therefore move that all items be taken in public as proposed. Is this agreed? That's agreed. Thank you very much. In that case, we move on to substantive business for this evening, which is item number 7, development of the Maidstone Town Centre strategy, which is pages 1 to 10 of your agenda packs. This report is going to be introduced by Philip Coyne. Phil, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take a few minutes. It's a long report, so apologies for that. The report describes the sort of background and the purpose of a town centre strategy, and it then goes on to look at the sort of areas, the scope of the strategy, and some of the sort of key areas of work that we would be looking to pursue sort of at the outset and as we move forward, subject obviously to debates that will take place at SPI tonight and at the other two service committees and at P&R. But as a bit of background, I mean, members will know that trends in town centres over many decades have witnessed periods of fairly substantial change, which has caused town centres and city centres indeed to adapt and respond and to almost morph into new things to meet new challenges. In the 1980s, the trend of out-of-town centres caused significant change. You know, people blamed out-of-town centres for decline in town centres, whereas actually that was really a shift of the retailing world toward the pile it high and sell it cheap approach, and the footplates in town centres didn't lend themselves to that. In the run-up to COVID-19, we were already seeing some structural change take place in the retailing world. In the sort of out-of-town sector, we've seen very significant shifts in food retailing with the scaling back of the sort of Tesco's and the Sainsbury's and the Asda's on the huge 100,000 square foot stores that they previously tried to promote. And in town centres, we've seen some operators come out, the likes of Marks and Spencer's and Next, that have moved toward that larger floor plate with a wider, more diverse product range, and quite often and are still increasingly looking to move to out-of-town centres as part of a shift in their retailing model. COVID-19 exacerbated this. It brought in a new generation of online shoppers. The decline of things like the Arcadis group, which you walk around any town centre, the likes of Burton's, Dorothy Perkins, Topshop, all parts of one group that left lots and lots of vacant units in town centres, and that's one of the reasons that as a different work strand, the council is looking quite quickly to bring forward an Article 4 direction to try and contain what happens to those units in the period while we sort of take this strategy forward. In addition to retailing, there were already changes emerging in the office sector. The demand for the traditional sort of grade A office that people like me had been sort of promoting to people for many, many years changed to companies that wanted the more sort of American-style loft office. So that was changing, and again, COVID-19 impacted on the office sector because on top of the changes already happening, people are now looking at different ways of working, looking at reducing floor space. Equally, there are opportunities coming out of that in that there is now emerging quite significant demand for more flexible serviced office space where people can rent desks. And we also know that from London-based companies, as a for instance, the hits from London-based companies on the Locating Kent website during COVID went up by something like 500%. So there are people looking to come out of London, and that may well be an opportunity for us. So some background there around the fact that our town centres are facing a bit of a watershed, and sort of we now need to look at how we take this forward. There's no rocket science here really in terms of how do we get people back in the town, how do we know what type of space new investors will want, how do we protect our existing and remaining retail base and diversify that. But then there are things coming sort of to overlay on that now, like how do we make the town centre contribute to our net neutral carbon agenda, and how do we make the environment of the town centre more user-friendly, more green, more permeable. So there are a few factors that we need to keep at the forefront of our minds, but I think two of the key ones, because you know, a lot of that is the stuff that we would be wanting to do anyway. But this strategy has got to be as much about building upon the really, really good work that the council have done with a lot of the town centre businesses and communities during COVID. It's about building on that and looking at what do we want the next generation of the town centre to look like. And not least, how do we reinforce Maidstone's role as the county town, and how do we make sure that as the county town, in Maidstone particularly, the town is something that everybody from across the borough can be proud of, but equally can relate to and identify with. So I've said the report sets out the scope of the strategy and the things we want to do, but I think that the discussion tonight, you know, sort of things that I think we need to look at, and I think we probably will end up looking at anyways. What do we do well in the town, and what do we not do so well? What do we think of the retail offer, the employment offer, the community offer, the leisure and culture offer, the arts offer, provision of health and education infrastructure, for instance? What could we do with more of? What should our USP be as a town? How comprehensive is our offer for the sort of various younger people, older people, families? What is it like to live in the town centre, and how do we make the town centre somewhere that more people want to live? In sort of bringing this to a close, I would say if we could please try and avoid getting too overly specific on particular sites or buildings, because obviously that's not always appropriate in a public meeting. And it's a long-term strategy, but whilst we will work on the strategy, the approach is that we will also be working on projects so that we start equally to, you know, we're not intending to sort of sit back and say, right, we've got to do the strategy before we do anything else. With, for instance, the people that want to come out of London, with things like infrastructure funding that may come forward post-COVID and post-Brexit, we want to move really quickly and make sure that we've got the projects ready for that. Finally, I'll just some of the things that came back. This report went to the Earl Committee on Tuesday evening of this week, as members will know. This certainly isn't exhaustive. There was a very long and very helpful and informative debate there, but some of the things that came through from there are things such as the need to look at the town centre as a sort of three-tier on the basis of a three-tier functionality. So for some people that live in the town centre, it's a local centre. For some, it's a district centre. For others, the visitors, etc., it's more of a regional centre. One of the things that came across that it was felt didn't come out strongly enough in the report was around heritage and the use of some of our very rich stock of listed buildings. I completely agree that doesn't come over strongly enough. Things like how we deal with the evening economy, more cultural events, light licensing and street trading was something. And I suppose that one of the things that I think sort of summed up the debate was the need not just to look at the new things that we aspire to and we want to get, but actually making the most of the things that we've got. So, Chair, I hope that's helpful in sort of informing the debate, and I will hand it back.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was quite helpful. There are a couple of points in there, and I just want to reiterate before I come to Councillor Harper, if we can try to avoid getting into specifics this evening, and there's very good reason for that. You know, if we were to sort of say, oh, we want to demolish a certain part of the town centre, which certainly isn't a policy at the moment, it's going to cause a little bit of consternation among some of our residents, and you know, we may end up going down a rabbit hole which we might wish to avoid at committee at the first stage. So first and foremost, Councillor Harper, who is joining us virtually, would you like to address the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. A lot of my what I was actually going to say, because obviously I'm a member of Earl, Phil has kindly pointed out. So of the 5 points I've written down here, I can summarise quite quickly. I think one of the things is which did come out at Earl was about the open space needs. And as obviously over time there's going to be more and more residents probably living in the town centre, we really need to think about the open space available for them. And we discussed there about the River Medway. But what sort of came to my mind the other day, or today even, was I suddenly thought, well, we have a lot of open space linked to the Medway, don't we? Because if we walk down towards Lockmeadow, on my side in Fant, you have Lockmeadow, the open space, and the new children's playground being put in. And then across the Millennium Bridge, we've got the fabulous space around the Archbishop's Palace, which will be coming back to us. Plus, adjacent to that, I don't know if Denise Joy is on the committee, but I've had discussions with her in the past over how we can open up the churchyard around the parish church to actually, bring that in more into an open space to be enjoyed by people. So there could be an opportunity as part of this to bring all of those sort of areas together. Really, the only other point which Phil didn't mention, which I just mentioned quickly, was around the governance of the scheme going ahead. Obviously, up until May, we'll be looking at it through Policy and Resources, SPI, Earl and Chi. Clearly, after the first of, whatever the crossover date is, we go to the executive model, it will be handled in a different way. And I was just really wanting us to remember that as we do that, to make sure that we have a system which is supported by all parties, and we're looking at a 50-year strategy, so we need all party support. We just need to think within the governance some way of perhaps reflecting the needs of the sort of town centre councillors in terms of, as Phil pointed out, the town functioning as a local centre and a district centre as well as a strategic thing for the whole borough. So really, I just like to leave those few comments with you now and endorse everything Phil said. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harper. Next to speak, I would like to invite Councillor English to address the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I wasn't quite ready because that was a surprisingly short speech.
We're all surprised.
Right, in terms of a town centre strategy or any other strategic document, the first thing one needs to do is to avoid making matters worse. The mistake a significant number of authorities have made in terms of both there are town centres, subsidiary town centres and the evening economy, is to allow the growth of residential development in urban centres to effectively close down the leisure economy. A number of venues, performing arts venues in particular in London, that have closed because of new residential development, significantly weakening the economy of those areas, represents something like half the entertainment to 2/3 in some parts of London and other significant urban areas of those entertainment venues. So we have to be very, very careful that, whilst encouraging, and I think we should be encouraging town centre living, that we have policies in place that make sure that the existing and future economic priorities are preserved. We have a number of very significant entertainment offers in this town which could be driven out of business if we're not careful. That is why, in relation to Len House, policies were adopted at Planning Committee to prioritise the rights of existing entertainment businesses in Bank Street and other neighbouring areas, and we need to be very, very careful in our policies that we don't prioritise residential development at the expense of the uses we need to maintain in the town centre. Secondly, we need to take on board the lessons of what we haven't had in the past. Many of the things we have wanted in the town centre, whether it's the bridge between the footbridge over the River Medway that should have occurred and hasn't occurred, have not happened because we haven't had in place the relevant policy background to actually seek civil or previously Section 106 contributions for those things. We have not had in place a policy that promotes events taking place in the town. I've had to struggle at planning committee to get tiny amounts of money from out of town developments for town centre events because we haven't had the right policy background. If we actually intend Maidstone to be a destination, we can't just have pretty stones laid down in Jubilee Square or in Week Street. We need to have events taking place on those pretty public squares which attract people. I don't know how many people were at planning committee last night. I know Val certainly was, and I was. Did you? And Dennis was, and I think Anne was too. Did you see how many people were out there in this town and how packed the businesses in Maidstone were around? Every single business around the town centre was absolutely jam-packed yesterday because we had the Christmas light switch on. And there's amazing attendance. On Sunday, we had probably the highest attendance we've had for a remembrance service in my living memory. There is a huge public appetite out there because of recent events for novelty, for meeting together, and actually for entertainment. But this town centre strategy must lay out very clearly what we want to see. And this policy we used to have a few years ago of Maidstone Borough Council saying, oh, it's all too difficult, we can't fund events, we can't get involved in them ourselves, has got to stop, because if we don't, we won't have a town centre. Because let's face it, retail will still have a place, but the future of town centres, the present of town centres, is retail, leisure, tourism, events taking place in those town centres. And if we don't have those, we can forget about all the other pretty things we might want on the back of it. Finally, I would say that people do live and work in the town centre. Those people are represented in different ways. Businesses through One Maidstone to a certain extent, but businesses and residents through councillors. We have in the past, and we must avoid this mistake if we're going to have a stable plan going forward, which will last a number of years. In the past, there's been a tendency for senior members of this council and senior officers to forget that the town centre is actually an award or a series of awards, and to think it's just a strategic priority and none of the local representatives matter. That has caused aggravation because information that has been available to town centre representatives was not communicated to those senior officers and members, and they made decisions that weren't necessarily soundly based in some cases, and even if they were, did not end up carrying public support and were more controversial than they could have been. So whilst I wouldn't necessarily use the wording that Councillor Harper used, I think there is an issue that town centre members in East, High Street, North, Bridge and Fant Ward do need to be included in the discussions going forward. Otherwise, we risk unnecessary political controversy on a document which, frankly, we've all got a vested interest, members and officers alike, of getting the maximum public support and buy-in for. Thank you very much. I could add a lot more, but I think that's quite enough for one evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor English. Right, what we will do now, obviously we will move to members of the committee. I suspect a few people might have things to say on this. Please try not to repeat each other, but anyone who wants to speak, I'm happy to hear. Councillor Rose. Why ever not?
Thank you very much, Chair. As I mentioned earlier on, I've had a great deal of feedback from residents talking about what is happening actually for them and their experiences in the town centre. I've actually come to several other committee meetings and fling myself on thinking about the Archbishop's Palace. My feeling is that if you want history, heritage and culture, you have got it in the Archbishop's Palace. And I am passionate, and I've spoken to other people who are passionate, that the people of Maidstone should have an entree into the Archbishop's Palace. We've talked previously about how much the maintenance of the building will cost. We've talked about the possibility of being able to rent part of it. It would be good to be able to rent part of it. That would help with the maintenance of the building. But we went to the civic service, we went into the reception afterwards, into the solar room. You may remember, before KCC took over, there was a cafe in the solar room. I feel that it would be a good entree for public to go into the solar room and be able just to have a bun and a cup of tea in the solar room. You've got history, you've got heritage, you've got culture in that whole... It makes me shiver when I think about that room and how just absolutely passionately I feel about that room. I stood in the solar watching people walk through the door, and the awe on some people's faces who'd never been in that building before really struck me. It's so important. What I'm thinking as far as culture, it's a possibility that maybe photography or art groups could possibly have small exhibitions or just having their paintings in the wall. When I spoke before about the Archbishop's Palace, someone said, well, wait a minute, disabled lifts. When I came out of the solar to go home myself, there was an elderly lady and we were talking about her going down the stairs, and someone said, wait a minute, there's a disabled person's lift. So therefore, I really feel passionately that the people of Maidstone, this is their building. It was Archbishop Courtenay 700 years ago that first founded that building. It's part and parcel of the character of who Maidstone is and what Maidstone is. And I feel passionately that if some rooms are rented off, fair goes, we need the money. But I really feel passionately that that solar should be able to have people, the public, being able, the people, residents of Maidstone, whose building it is, being able to go into that building. Can I move further on to ERL on the 16th? We had Mr. Jeff Robinson came in and talked about Market Hall and the market and that whole area there. And it was an extremely interesting presentation, so may I point you towards that. Also, sorry if I'm going to go on a bit, but my colleague, Councillor Harper and I, are flinging ourselves at trying to get something sorted out with a gridlock at Hart Street and Barker Road, which is, if you're not quite sure about it, it's between McDonald's and the Law Court, and there's gridlock there, and people, we want to make that area totally open, people being able to go to that area, be driving through, being able to drive out again. And we have tried to go to JTB. We have, I think we're on the work programme in January, but I'm a little bit concerned because the last meeting of JTB, I think, was cancelled, so that's a problem that we have. Also came out from residents that there's a problem with some of the private car parking, using the machines. I've had personal problems with that myself. So therefore, I really would like just to raise those issues. The Market Hall, the tremendous amount of stuff that goes on in the Market Hall. It's a real focus point. The problems we have in the traffic in Hart Street and Barker Road, payments difficulties in the car parks that, not Maidstone Borough car parks, but privately owned car parks, and also my absolute passion that residents should be allowed entry into Archbishop's Palace. The gardens are more or less, they're very nice, the gardens outside the palace, but they're virtually almost a walk-through. But beside there, beside the entrance, there is a rose garden, and that would be delightful if that was, I think at the moment the gate is locked, you can't go into it, but it would be delightful if that was used. So along with thinking about that whole area, there's so much that can be done, but there's difficulties as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose.
I know I've spoken a lot, but thank you very much for allowing me.
No, thank you very much for your very comprehensive comments there. Just to pick up on a couple of those points, just for your information, the future of the Archbishop's Palace will be discussed at the January meeting of PNR. I'm sure the chairman would be delighted for you to come and speak as a visiting member on that subject. And just as you commented on the traffic situation at Barker Road, there is actually a working group that has been set up to look at that. And I'm well aware that the chairman of the JTB is pushing for that to be on the agenda fairly soon. But thank you very much. So next to speak, I've got Councillor Spooner, followed by Councillor Russell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very, very good introductory talk by, sorry, I've forgotten your name. Philip Coyne, sorry. I nearly called you Councillor Coyne as I was, anyway. And some good points made by Paul Harper and by Margaret Rose and by, what's his name? Clive English, yes, right. The town centre needs to be seen, I think, you know, with my planner's hat on, as a multifunctional entity which has lots of different uses, and a major problem we have is how to get people in, how to get people out, and where they park, if they park, or if we can get them to use other forms of transport, which we should be doing. It seems to me that the whole basis of doing the development plan document could be basically, I think someone already mentioned this, basically a SWOT analysis of seeing what our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats are, and how we can build upon those. Build upon the strengths. I mean, I've often heard it said that we don't make enough of the riverside, and I think that's very, very true compared to what I see other towns have done with their villages. We have a wonderful asset in the River Medway. I don't think there's enough made of park and sail, which I know comes about at Christmas time, but you know, it could be encouraged other times of the year to bring people in. But I think we look at it as a multifunctional entity. In that respect, you know, there are several sort of topic areas that we need to look at, and I've got them listed down here. Other people may have other ideas, but there's retail, which obviously has been the bedrock of the town centre for many, many years, but now increasingly leisure, culture, heritage, social activities and residential uses. I think, you know, they've all got to be looked at individually. What are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, opportunities, threats, how can we bring them together, and how can we service them with adequate transport? I think that's all I need to say. You know, that is just an indication of how I think the DPD could move forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spooner. Councillor Russell, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just in its infancy, so just a couple of things that I thought about that I wasn't sure had been highlighted, and they might be discounted later, but I thought I'd just throw them in. Number one was an overall scheme for the town centre for lighting. So there are different bits that are lit in different ways, but I wondered if there was a strategy for lighting, or a theme, if you like, that could be incorporated into the project. And my second thought, and it could be just too out there, but a lot of the town centres that really work well and have another dimension to the three that have been mentioned, the three tiers that have been mentioned, are those that have a place of further education based within the town centre. So be it a university or a college or you know, some centre for training, that brings a whole nother dimension to both the daytime and the nighttime economy. So yeah, that was just my 2 points as we're at the start of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Russell. And Councillor Clark, would you like to have the last word?
I don't want to repeat some of the items that many of us have discussed over the years about the town centre. There's a lot of opportunities. We've got the river, we've got the potential for a lot more trees in the town, a lot more open space. We do, however, have some challenges, and one of my thoughts were, we've got parks like Brenchley Park, where we've had some challenges over time, and I think we've got to look at some of the challenges that we face as we roll out new initiatives so that we don't end up with the same sort of problems. And I think security is a big one in the town. I think there are people that are put off coming into Maidstone, certain areas of Maidstone even, because of the sort of worry of crime, that sort of thing. So I think we've really got to keep that central when we think about open spaces and where we're going to sort of make improvements in the town. I definitely think we should be looking at performing arts. Something like a university, it creates an anchor. You look at all the big universities, Stanford spawned Silicon Valley, you look at Harvard, you look at all of the major sort of places where people go to learn. They stay there when they finish their courses, and they set up businesses, and it brings more of the same. So I think that that's something where, I know we work with University of Greenwich at the moment locally, and the Christchurch, Canterbury, but maybe that is something we can work with KCC perhaps to boost. We've got a lot of opportunities around the river. I think there's a lot of harm around the river that we could maybe look into. The Liddell site, we've talked about that at this committee before, whether we could actually make the river more of a feature around that area rather than it being just sort of blocked off by buildings. The House of Fraser looks as if it actually has a balcony that should face the river. It's all blocked off inside, but it actually looks like there could be a cafe in there. It looks like it was designed to be like that, but you've never seen that in that building. That could be something we could work with them to open up, perhaps. One other thing I just think I'll end on. We talked about this idea of a sort of food court in Lockmeadow. I don't want to be down on it, but I just think I should mention this because it's something which we could roll out in other areas. When we talked about that at this committee, we talked about sort of maybe some soft lighting, some sort of raw wood, and so we sort of talked about Spitalfields and some of the borough markets in London, or Borough Market, Camden Market. Somebody told me that the food court looks like it's been designed by old people, and I went there, and the food's great. I think that we've missed out a little bit on our potential. The food is great there, and the small operators, little hole in the walls. I really commend that. I think it's superb. But the sort of, how can I say, the very bland tiling. That you look up at the lights, and they're these ugly sort of elliptical LED strips. The mood in that place is not what it could be, I don't think. And I think that in the summer, we could sort of extend that out into the parking area. We could have kiosks like they have in Camden Market, that sort of thing. I think the food will bring people, but I think we could do more in terms of design. And I hope that as we go forward, we might be able to sort of maybe go to some of the places where these things are successful and take some of the design elements from those schemes.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Unfortunately, you do not have the last word because a couple of councillors have asked to speak. Just before I do invite other councillors, can we please try and make sure that we keep our comments within the remit of what this paper is actually about, which is an overall sort of tactical strategy for the, I guess, you can't have a strategy that's tactical, but you get what I mean. I have Councillor Grigg, and then the last word to Councillor Springett.
Thank you. Yes, it's such a broad discussion topic that we could actually spend a day on. But I wanted to sort of just cover a few things. I think everything that's said has been very relevant, and I've agreed with most of it, in fact all of it. I'm just going to give you a couple of headings that I had down here. I think one of the big things for me is an efficient maintenance. If I imagine what I want Maidstone to look like in 30 years' time, I want it to look smart. Efficient maintenance, yes, we have got pretty stones, but they're looking pretty shabby in some places, and I'm not happy with the maintenance. It's no point doing it if we're not going to look after it. So my main thing would be, whatever we do, let's look after it. The lights brought in and a massive amount of people which did that. I've always wanted Maidstone to have something like a Christmas market that runs from November to December. It brings in so many people, and we've got the ideal Jubilee Square area, which could go all the way up Week Street, pedestrianised. It would bring thousands of people to Maidstone if we could do that. I have got here, safe, easy parking is essential, good lighting is essential. So that's part. I've also got here better use of the river frontage. I agree with everything that's been said about that. And lastly, one of the things that I think could create jobs that would be absolutely wonderful for the town in 30 years, it's money, I know, but I've always think, like, if you look into Folkestone now, the artist quarter that they've actually got there that attracts in, basically Maidstone after 8 o'clock at night doesn't encourage 40-year-olds plus to come in. There's nothing here for them. Yes, improve the cultural, better use, more attractiveness of the theatre. Let's have shows that attract older people. Let's make more of that theatre. Somewhere like the Marlow, I know Hazlitt isn't like the Marlow, but it brings in so many people. So a better offering, cultural offering, an artist quarter. I've always thought the Peugeot garage down there, that whole area from there all the way to Stone Street, could be bistros, could be artist studios, all the way, smarten it all the way up to Upper Stone Street. I just think it could look fabulous. Put all those things together, but going forward, I'd actually like to be part of a group that looks at this more and actually progresses it, because I've been to meetings like this before over these areas, and then it seems to die a death and we don't do any more. I think I've heard river frontage said for the last 12 years every year, but nothing has ever happened. I know money's an issue, but I think if we want this to happen in the next 30 years, we've got to put a strategy in place to make it happen. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grigg. And now to Councillor Springett, please.
Thank you. I was looking at our cross-cutting issues and the impact on corporate priorities. Now, corporate priorities are embracing growth and enabling infrastructure, safe, clean and green, homes and communities, and a thriving place. The top one I'll bypass for the moment, but the safe, clean and green picks up on what Councillor Grigg was saying about keep our town looking smart. The green picks up on Councillor English's open spaces and more trees. So I think that homes and communities, well, we are getting more homes in the town centre, so that will develop communities. And a thriving place picks up on the events comment also from Councillor English. Before now, I've been in the town on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and there've been buskers. Now, whether you love them or whether you hate them, they create quite an ambience. And in fact, one of them we ended up hiring to come and sing in our garden when we had a garden party. It was a young girl, and she was absolutely fabulous. And I'm just wondering whether we could have a busking festival or try and bring more music into the town, because it really creates a buzzing atmosphere. It just, especially when the sun's shining, you think, oh, that sounds nice. Well, then you go along to have a look, and it just creates an atmosphere. So coming back again to Councillor English, his comments about events, perhaps we could have some artists. Can we encourage artists for a little art exhibition in Jubilee Square? Could we have a little music, some music events in Jubilee Square? Could we have some busking events in Jubilee Square, something just to give people something to come and look at, to get them into, like the light switch on, brought people into town. I do agree events would be a great idea. That's my only comments I wish to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Springett. Nobody else has indicated to speak, so I think that we are, the point of that report was for discussion. I think we've got some initial discussion, and obviously this is something which we will taken away and doing some more work on, and hopefully forming something going forwards that will involve all members. So now we move on to item number 8 on the tonight's agenda, which is the local development scheme, which is going to be introduced by Mark Edgerton. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Among other matters, the local development scheme is required to set out the timing and focus of development plan documents and local plans that a local planning authority wishes to produce. Work is, of course, continuing on the local plan review, but there is a need to produce 2 new development plan documents which would sit alongside the local plan review and should therefore be referenced within the Council's local development scheme. These are the Gypsy and Traveller DPD and the Design and Sustainability DPD. The proposed updated local development scheme is appended to the report. It's worth noting that these will not be the only programmed strategic planning work streams, as there will be supplementary planning documents for 3 key development locations proposed in the local plan review, a need to update the community infrastructure levy charging schedule, and work on Maidstone Town Centre strategy, of course. However, these latter documents do not feature within the local development scheme. In terms of the Gypsy and Traveller DPD, the report sets out the circumstances around the ongoing needs assessment, including the delays due to COVID-19, but the potentially significant need for new pitches in that is apparent. The most appropriate course of action is to undertake a separate DPD that will also be informed by a pitch deliverability assessment and a targeted call for sites exercise. The local development scheme provides the overall timetable for production of this DPD, including undertaking the call for sites exercise from February 2022 and completing the document by late 2024. In terms of the Design and Sustainability DPD, the details of this document were presented and agreed at the 21st of September meeting of this committee. However, a summary of this document is provided within the report. The key matters include biodiversity, including biodiversity net gain, design, including design coding and sustainable connectivity. An overall timetable is also contained within the local development scheme, including an initial Regulation 18 consultation from April 2022. There are no changes to the local plan review document. The relevant details in this regard are simply absorbed from the currently approved and published version of the local development scheme. Finally, a reminder that the local development scheme would replace the existing version, and the report seeks a recommendation to full council that the local development scheme 2021 to 2024 is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Does anyone have any questions on this? No? In that case, the report was for noting, and there is one recommendation, and the recommendation is to full council that the local development scheme 2021 to 2024 is approved. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much, members. And now we move on to the last item on our agenda this evening, item number 9, local plan review update, which is pages 36 to 37 in your agenda pack. And again, it's going to be introduced by Mark Edgerton. Over to you, please, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Following the resolutions made at the 4th of October 2021 meeting of this committee and at the 6th of October 2021 full council meeting, officers undertook work in preparation for the ongoing Regulation 19 public consultation on the local plan review draft for submission documents, as well as the concurrent consultation on the associated sustainability appraisal. The consultations commenced on the 29th of October 2021 and will finish on the 12th of December 2021. They are being undertaken in accordance with government requirements, as well as requirements contained in Maidstone's Statement of Community Involvement. We have already received a significant number of representations, which we have started processing. Subject to the amount and nature of representations resulting from the ongoing consultation, the intention is to keep to the published timetable, including submission in March 2022. I'll now hand you back, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Grigg Councillor Grigg and then Councillor Springett.
Thank you, Chair. I do actually have 3 areas I'd like to discuss this. I don't know how you best see it. If I do one thing at a time and then get response to that and then go on to the second and the third is just
I think that's
a request.
the easy, yeah.
Is that
No,
okay?
I think that will be the best way to do it.
Well, the first thing was the consultation form. A few concerns I have on the consultation form. Having looked at it and downloaded it and tried to fill it out. It is extremely complicated, and that worries me for residents. You have to sort of form an account, create an account to get it out. And what the other thing that really concerns me about it is that when you get the form, the question leads you to accept the offering rather than make an individual opinion on it. It is actually basically, to answer the questions, it's tick boxing, and it's very hard for you to actually put your own opinions on it. I think that is not on. The other thing, there was a comment on it, which I would like, really loud here, sorry, clarification on, was it says you can send a letter, but the letter has to follow the form. And does that mean that if someone just writes in a letter, it's not accepted? That was a question, because it specifically says that the consultation form must, any letter must follow the routine of the form. And for your everyday person who wants to write in and say something, I mean, you know, I found it daunting as a councillor with 12 years experience. And I know my parish council, I had a meeting with them on Monday, and they were like, we can't make head nor tail of this, Sue. We wanted to write a letter and we can't do that. So could I just sort of have an answer on that? On the consultation form as well, and then I'll let you respond to that. A couple of my residents have said they've had letters sent out to them asking for their comments. I just wonder if you could tell me how many letters have been sent out and to who, how you've decided who those letters go to. So that's the first thing on the consultation form.
That's fine. Well, I will, if we allow your questions to be answered, we'll come back to you. Mark, Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Grigg. This is one of the real difficulties, I think, as we get into the latter stages of the local plan review. It starts off, we had the Regulation 18 scoping themes and issues, and it was nice questionnaires and what do you want to be included in the plan, and things got more technical as we got to the preferred approaches, and now we're moving into Regulation 19, and the requirements from the government in this regard are that we should be seeking comments regarding the tests of soundness and the legal compliance of the plan. And all of a sudden, we've jumped into quite a technical area, and those comments, we will analyse them, of course, as professional officers, and we'll report to this committee. But they're forwarded to a government inspector for assessment in a very technical examination in public. So I think, first of all, a little bit of reassurance, but obviously that's the context to this. We are simply trying to meet the requirements for this stage, and the fact that we are required to consider things on the basis of these fairly complicated tests of soundness and legal compliance tests. So we have used a form, this is a standard form derived from the Planning Inspectorate, which it sets out things in a very standard way, but is necessarily fairly complicated, as Councillor Grigg mentions. The reassurance is that members of the public, anyone who wishes to make a representation on the Regulation 19 document, doesn't have to use that form. They don't have to use the exact process set out in the form. What we are trying to do is to allow the residents to understand that they will have their thoughts, their representations considered in a certain way. Again, regarding the test of soundness and legal compliance. But if residents or anyone else wants to make a representation through a letter, and they wish to do it in their own format, those representations will be accepted. Now, let's move on to the second point here. How many letters were sent out and to whom? We have a local development framework consultation database. It is an independent database that is held within the planning department. It isn't connected to any other database that we held in the council, and it is specifically for those who have expressed interest in the past or have wished to stay informed regarding the consultations that we hold in strategic planning. My understanding is that I suppose, I'm not going to be too specific, but I think it's in the region of 6,000 entries are in that database. Obviously, if people let us know that they are no longer wishing to receive consultation notifications, we take them off that database. However, those who have previously made representations, we received, for example, about 3,100 representations to the Regulation 18 Preferred Approaches consultation, will have also been notified about the Regulation 19 consultation as well. So it's a live document, working document, and that's what we use to undertake the consultations. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer that question?
It certainly does. Thank you. I'm reassured about the letter, and I was just out of pure interest wanted to know who you were actually writing to, so that's perfect. My next thing is transport and highway infrastructure. And I'm not sort of having a go, I'm sort of trying to make myself understand the process. That I know we've done transport modelling, I know transport modelling has happened. We have now gone out for consultation to residents and everyone. Without that highway infrastructure being finalised, is it fair to our residents to ask them to comment on a plan which could be dramatically changed by highway infrastructure decisions? And my biggest concern is no JTB meetings, no strategic infrastructure working group meetings. When are we going to know what is happening as regarding the progress of highway infrastructure?
Perhaps I could answer part of that question. I think your first question, is it fair, is quite a philosophical question. Indeed, whom you ask would determine which answer you get. However, this has been a question which has been deliberated previously by this committee in giving a recommendation to full council to push ahead with the local plan review. And then indeed full council have decided that they believe that that was sufficient. From my recollection on the night of the full council meeting when we discussed the local plan review, I don't think that was brought up, and certainly no amendment was drawn on that basis. So whilst I think the points you make are perfectly valid in terms of is it fair, well, this committee and this council have determined it to be so, would be my view. In terms, has anyone, Mark or Phil, do you have anything to add that I perhaps haven't?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to get into the nature of the response which you've made. I'll answer from a purely technical point of view. Yes, it is the case, of course, that we produce something called an integrated transport strategy associated with the local plan review. And for the benefit of everyone, including those listening, we obviously have that document to illustrate the transport infrastructure that we consider is necessary to support the proposals and growth contained within the local plan review. Councillor Griggs, absolutely right. It's a working document. It isn't a sort of a final thing. We have the ability to modify and update some of the schemes which are proposed within it. In fact, for clarity, there are actually two integrated transport strategy documents associated with the evidence base for the local plan review. We have the original integrated transport strategy. That is the one which has been carried forward from the local plan 2017, because I think it's vital that we all know that the delivery of the 2017 local plan doesn't just stop in terms of infrastructure and indeed the growth just because we're moving forward with the local plan review. It's absolutely vital we continue with the delivery of infrastructure associated with the 2017 local plan. So that integrated transport strategy is valid, it's relevant, and will continue to be pushed in terms of delivery. We also have an addendum to the integrated transport strategy this time round, and that's been published with the Regulation 19 documents, and that sets out the overall proposals for new infrastructure associated with the spatial strategy and growth for the local plan review itself. When I talked about it, that things sort of updating and so forth, I mentioned in the previous report the fact that we have supplementary planning documents which will be produced for some of the main growth locations. These will be opportunities, I think, to take forward some of the transport infrastructure that is associated particularly with those. So it's an illustration, really, of how we could take things forward. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Has that answered your question?
Yes, it has answered my question, and I thank you for that. But I actually still would like it registered that I, as a member of this committee, have great concerns that there is no major transparency for residents to see what is happening with our highway infrastructure and our integrated transport. They can't see the 3D local plan. They can't see how it's all fitting together. And I have concerns about the lack of JTB meetings and the lack of strategic infrastructure working group meetings. I know that both of those haven't taken place. And I know that when I was working on it, that was how we progressed. So I want to register my concern on that point. Thank you, Chair. My last point, and it's a quick one, and it's a request for some information, personal information that I need. I'm talking about land north of Cox Heath, Beacons Park. I know that it is not wrong to put an application of that size in at the stage it was placed in, and I assume that was in response to the public consultation and comments that came in, that decision was made to include the application. Please, can I be sent the comments that formed that decision for me to look at?
I will certainly request that that information is forthcoming. I can't imagine that we would be able to give you the level of detail this evening that you request, but I will ask the Head of Planning to send both you and I that information.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry, I went on a bit there.
No, not a problem at all. So I've got Councillor Springett, then Councillor Clark, and then Councillor Rose. So Councillor Springett, please.
Thank you. Firstly, the bringing in of sites straight into Reg 19 happened in the last plan as well. It happened to at least one site that I know of that went to P&R to decide whether or not it should go in the plan. And they went, yes, and it went straight to Reg 19. So, yeah, but that's what happened. That has happened before, and I wasn't happy about it then, I would have to say. JTB don't even go there. I was adamant that the meeting before last would not be cancelled. I am not cancelling this meeting. And then I was told we didn't have a venue that could have virtual attendance. So half of the reports that were going to be presented would not have officers in attendance to answer any questions. And the only way we could do it was hiring Moat Hall at great expense for a report on the buses and a report on the trains. And I had to cancel that because I felt that wasn't justified. The most recent meeting was cancelled because there wasn't a venue considered big enough to meet COVID requirements. We asked KCC if we could use County Hall, and they said no. So hit your head against a brick wall. However, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We are in the process of arranging a date within the next few weeks for JTB. So it will happen. I believe KCC have now relented, and we might be going to County Hall, but that's still to be confirmed. So we are trying to get JTB to happen, because I do agree there's some important documents to be brought out into the public so we can question them, and that does need to happen. And then my final point, actually, I think you've sort of raised some of it. I have had a resident that's come to me. He was just querying the ITS evidence, because he said, you've changed the date on it, but it's not been updated. And his concerns were that it looked like it was the same old document being rolled up without any allowance made for the increased housing. So I think you've partly clarified that. I just wondered why we changed the date. Could we not leave it as original 2017 on it rather than changing the date? Because I think that's caused a confusion in changing the date but not changing the content. I know the addendum deals mostly with the garden villages, and I think there's just that, well, what happens for the other houses around? Are we making any allowance? So I don't know if I could have a little bit of clarification, because that has been raised with me, and I think it's to do with this changing of dates and not updating the document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Springer. Rob Jarman, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, I'll make no comments on meetings. It's not my place. But as you said, Chairman, the primary document for any infrastructure scheme, in this case transport, is the local plan itself. All the ITS is just an evidence base. So what I think members are talking about, but you set it out very clearly, I can think of lots of houses, for instance, which have now been built in the southeast of Maidstone, but certain junction improvements haven't been delivered. But the policies are clearly set out in the adopted local plan. So I just wanted to be very direct on that.
No, thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate those comments. And then just to close up, we've got Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if, well, I would certainly like to see that evidence that Councillor Grigg had mentioned. We did have a site that came in last time, and that was, it's always controversial when it happens, so I think that we should have as much information as we can have to share with residents. Consultation responses are public record, so I would certainly like to see that, because I think that's something that we should be keeping an eye out for. I'd also like to follow up on the first point that Councillor Grigg raised about the complexity and how challenging it is to find this structure or to submit in this structure. If the response was that anyone can submit however they would like to structure their consultation response, can I ask officers, can we go to that website and make sure it's very clearly labelled that we can do that? Because we've had a few instances, not necessarily with the local plan, where we would not have to fend as many questions as members if there were small amounts of guidance, and we use the website, we give feedback to the IT team, and things are changed. But with this one, it's very time bound, so if we can get that on there as soon as possible, I think it will just help the consultation. That's everything.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. And Councillor Rose, you have the final word.
I'd like to join with Councillor Grigg in my own concerns about JTB, and I'd like to thank Councillor Springett for the explanation and the words that she has given. And just to say that Councillor Harper and I are working with officers from KCC discussing the gridlock at Hart Street and Barker Road, and we are concerned about being able to go on to a meeting. So I just wanted to add my words to that, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rose. Councillor Russell.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things, really, picking up on what Councillor Clark said. To some respect, I disagree. I think the consultation is actually quite clear, and there are a number of ways you can complete the consultation. In fact, you can just email ldf@maidstone.gov.uk to give your responses into that. One thing I would really like to just check is that there are going to be so many responses to this consultation, and I know this happened at 18B, and it's going to happen again this time, quite rightly so, and really I would just like to check that the officers are ready and able and willing to deal with them all. Thank you.
Officers, are you ready, willing and able?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Russell. Officers are already operating on these, the processing of these representations, and we're undertaking the early stages of the analysis as well. I think it's why I was a little bit caveaty in the introduction to this report. Obviously, we are on a tight timetable to get to submission in March 2022. And so, you know, if we do receive thousands and thousands of representations, you know, we may need to look at that in terms of the timetabling. But I can assure members categorically that as we stand, we are on top of the processing and with the analysis initially of these representations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Nobody else has indicated to speak. Therefore, this report was for noting. Members, is that report noted? It is. Well, thank you very much. I really thank everybody for giving up their
Sorry,
Friday.
Chair, could I just make one point? We commented at the last meeting that we've got a very heavy workload for the 7th of December.
Yes.
I am concerned that if we do go over and need an adjourned date, December's getting incredibly booked up because of Christmas, whether we could have that adjourned date as soon as we possibly can, just to put in as a proviso.
Councillor Grigg, I am one step ahead of you. I have spoken with Olivia, who has spoken already to the proper officer. We do have an adjourned date if we need it. The reason it wasn't communicated before this evening, we didn't want to confuse anyone in case people thought that it was the adjourned meeting. I fully anticipate that we will be able to get through all of our business in the December meeting on one night, and I would request that members of the committee assist me in that process. Nevertheless, I thought it was prudent, not least because I go away, so I wouldn't be able to chair anyway after the 12th of December. But nevertheless, I thought it might be prudent to ensure that we do have a date, just so that we don't have to use it. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you giving up your Friday evening, particularly to Councillor Brindle, who is here voluntarily this evening. Also may I welcome Councillor Rose, who is now a member of this committee. I declare that this meeting is closed.